what would you say Marvel Contest of Champions excels the best at? Their champions? Their content? Their offers? Well, I think Marvel Contest Champions excels the best at their bosses, a true challenge for summoners that really puts their skill and knowledge of the game to test. Well, most of the time, actually. Some of these bosses are less than desirable, actually. But anywho, with the introduction of the latest boss, that being the 9.4 Corrupted Karina boss, it really had me wondering, which bosses has Kabam done the best at, and which have they done the worst at? Because let's be real, a lot of bosses are really good here, while some are bad, like I've said before. So, with today's video, I will be examining every single boss Kabam has ever made at the time that they released to compare their strengths and their weaknesses to really determine who is the worst and who is the best. And with the introduction of Karina, today we will be ranking 27 bosses. It was originally supposed to be 25, but as it turns out, there's 2 of them. Actually 3, that third one's like cousin Blackjack or whatever. Now, before I get into this video, there's a couple things I need to go over. Most importantly, what would I consider to be a boss in Marvel Contest Champions? So, from my perspective, a boss is a final fight in a long quest that offers a unique and challenging perspective on gameplay, most notably through phase-based and health loss mechanics, as you'll see through most of these bosses today. These bosses are champions that are unplayable to the summoner at the time of their release, because as you'll see, 3 of these bosses are now playable to the summoner, but the most important part for me is they have to have some level of payoff for how long you're in the fight for. So basically what I mean here is that a lot of these bosses like to reward players for dealing with their difficult mechanics with other mechanics such as Wounded. And that is what I consider to be a true boss character in Marvel Contest Champions, but granted there are a couple exceptions. So here are a couple characters that I won't be talking about today. The first being the Act 7 mashup characters, because they're in reality just normal characters but with different characters' abilities. And then finally, the Act 6.4 Hydra Adaptoid. While you very much could include him due to the fact that he very much falls under the category of Kang and Thanos, I decided not to solely for the fact of his release date, that being the act right before Grandmaster. To me, it would just feel very unfair to rank a champion who, by the time of their release, the more modern boss molds were already starting to form. One final thing before we get into the video, if you enjoy it, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a ton, but only do so if you're enjoying the video. Now, without further ado, it is officially time to rank every boss made in Marvel Contest of Champions from worst to best. Let's get into it. You know, when I was making this video, I found it pretty difficult to rank a bunch of these bosses towards the middle portion of this because, honestly, a lot of them are pretty interchangeable and really just depend on your own preference of gameplay. All of them except for 3. And if you know anything about the bosses here, I'm pretty sure a lot of you know 2 of these 3 bosses right away. And just to emphasize how bad these bottom 3 are comparatively to every other boss I'm going to be talking about today, if Kabam continued to design bosses the way they decided to design these 3 in particular, nobody would be playing this game anymore because they were just that cheap and unfair. Now, when it comes to the absolute bottom of the barrel of all of these, I think the worst boss Kabam has ever made is Act 5.2 Collector. Now, I know what a couple of you are probably thinking, Han, you forgot to turn the saturation down. That's the worst Collector fight. I'd have to disagree. So when I'm looking at the Collector fights here, I'm looking solely at the fights when they released, because if we're looking at modern perspectives, yeah, Abyss Collector is obviously worse. But if we're taking these characters at the exact moment they released, this guy was so bad, people weren't able to get greater than 20 hit combos before ultimately biting the dust. And that's why I rank these bottom 3 so lowly, because they weren't designed with the goal of being an engaging boss fight per se, more so they were designed with the goal of milking as much money out of you as humanly possible. So what in my opinion makes this version of Collector the absolute worst boss fight? So right off the bat, he has a 55% chance to purify any debuff off of himself, and this purify is literally instant. So you might be saying that there are 2 very obvious solutions here. Either play around the mechanics by doing intercepts only, or just bring an anti-purify champ. And to that, I have to say, yeah. You are absolutely correct in saying that those are 2 very valid ways to counter Collector. in 2026. I will solely be judging bosses based off of their day one release, and Collector released in June of 2017. So kind of revisiting these two methods of countering Collector, it's not looking as great anymore, I'll say. So the first anti-Purify champion actually released 3 months prior in the form of Archangel, and intercepting was kind of still in its infancy. So medium intercepting was known at the time, but it was very rare to see, and light intercepting was entirely absent. And if you thought that was bad, that is quite literally just a passive that Collector has at all times. That's not even his main gimmick. The whole thing with Collector is that he gets more and more abilities based off of the health that he loses during a fight. So here is all of them listed in order. At 85% health remaining, he will no longer take more than 3% of his max health from any single damage source. At 70% health remaining, he will get increased critical hit rating and armor rating. At 55% health remaining, all his special attacks will become permanently unblockable, and this cannot be affected in any way, shape, or form. At 40% health remaining, he will become immune to all bleed, poison, stun, and power lock effects. At 25% health, he will become periodically unstoppable for 3.5 seconds, and then at 10% remaining, he will periodically get a regeneration. Now, most of these aren't necessarily that bad, but there are two that are very much a problem and what causes most people to just completely rage at this fight. Those being the 25% and 55% health thresholds. So what makes the Unstoppable most annoying in this fight isn't necessarily the fact that he just goes unstoppable, but more so the implementations of said Unstoppable. The way that this Unstoppable triggers is through a timer. When the timer expires, he will go unstoppable. The biggest problem here is there's no indication of when the timer will expire, basically meaning it's random chance. He'll go unstoppable whenever he feels like it. But that's not even his worst ability. You want to take a guess what his worst ability is? The fact that his special attacks, when he goes to 55% health, become fully unblockable for the rest of the fight. The optimal gameplay loop for this guy, if you didn't have a direct counter, was to just hit him as much as you can until he got to his special attack, and at that point, he just threw his special attack and then you were dead. No way to counter it at all. And the counters were so sparse that the only two people that you could really use were Daredevil to fully evade the special attacks, and even then that wasn't consistent, or Vision to completely power lock him so that he could never throw a special attack, because blocking unblockables did not exist at this time. Like, I can't even with this guy. This is the most blatant attempt to force players to use revives I have ever seen in this game. And the worst part is, there's still one more big issue to talk about with this guy. His node choice, which is Bane. Originally, I wasn't going to talk about Bane here at all because it's just not part of boss's kits, but honestly, Bane is such an important part of this fight that I couldn't not talk about it at all. So the way Bane is supposed to work is that you attack opponents to put a timer-based degen on them, and the second that timer expires, it'll transfer onto you. Just hit them again and it'll transfer back to them. But the way it works with Collector is super juicing his unstoppable and unblockable special attacks to give tick damage that puts Acidic Alien to shame. Did you somehow manage to survive his special one? Well, it doesn't matter because the degen's got you handled. Trying to transfer it onto the opponent? Doesn't matter, he's unstoppable now, nothing you can do there. It's abilities like this that make me think that Collector is the worst boss that they've ever designed, and I really hope that they never do stuff like this ever again. To absolutely nobody's surprise, the number 26 spot here is going straight to the Abyss Collector. Honestly, I'm glad this guy's no longer in charge of the contest because the only thing this guy knows how to collect is bottom spots and tier lists. While I was making this video, I ran a poll to see what you guys thought was the worst boss they ever made in this game, and this guy won by a relatively large margin. And I absolutely understand that. I mean, this guy basically is a glorified version of Collector with more hit points, and in some cases has abilities that can be seen as worse than a normal Collector fight. But I gotta say, I think that Abyss Collector just outshines him because at least there is an attempt to build upon the problems that I had with the first iteration of Collector, even if they weren't amazing sometimes. So the Abyss Collector shares a bunch of the same abilities as the OG Collector, with a couple of them being tweaked just a little bit. So at 85% health remaining, Collector will no longer be able to take more than 1% of his max health from any damage source, but if that triggers, he will gain an Unstoppable buff, which will have a cooldown of re-triggering after 10 seconds. At 70% health, he also gets increased critical hit rating and armor rating. At 55% health remaining, this got changed completely to where his special attacks can no longer miss, be evaded, or auto-blocked, and they have 25% block penetration. At 40% health remaining, he will trigger the same immunities as the 5.2 Collector with the added Insane Incinerate immunity. At 25% health remaining, he will trigger the same periodic Unstoppable, but this time there is a timer. And finally, at 10% health remaining, this ability also got completely changed. Instead of a regeneration, he instead places displacements on you. This can be prevented by doing a well-timed block, and at 20 displacements, he will instantly kill you. The final thing to note here is whenever Collector hits these health threshold, he will place an Abyssal Fractal on the opponent. Whenever the timer naturally expires, they will immediately take 50% of their current HP. This can be prevented by knocking him down before the timer expires. So immediately, there's a lot of things to note about this guy. One being that the two big problems with the first Collector that made him so annoying were immediately fixed. So the 55% health threshold is amazing now, and I absolutely love it. And as for the 25% health remaining Unstoppable, there is now a timer, so you can at least predict when he's going to go Unstoppable to counteract it. And these are great. I absolutely love these changes, and I think it makes for a significantly more engaging Collector fight than prior. But also, there's a couple new abilities that really kind of if me, you know? The first one being at the 85% health threshold, he now gets that Unstoppable whenever that protection triggers. It's not the biggest deal breaker for me, considering that you can play a little bit slower to kind of predict it. You at least know when that Unstoppable is going to trigger comparatively to before when it just happened, it's seemingly random. The second thing, while the Bane is gone, thank goodness, it was traded in for a flat 10% chance for him to evade all attacks, which does kind of feel a little bit cheap, but again, it's not a complete deal breaker for me. So yeah, while I may be one of 3 Abyss Collector fans besides Bureau Man and MSD, I can honestly say that this guy very much improves on the problems that I had with the first Collector to make for a very engaging fight.
And then you had to just go and ruin the ride.
Displacement is the worst thing I've ever seen, and dropped this guy all the way from spot 20 to second to last. I mean, you spent all this time to make the Collector more engaging, and then this is the final 10%? Did I forget to mention that one special one basically puts you at half the displacement needed to kill you, and he gets increased combat power rate based off the specials thrown in the fight? You fixed every issue I had with the previous Collector, and then you made this? This is the best you could come up with? 2 out of 10 fight. You blew it at the end. Now is where we get into the interesting section, because while I know everyone knew that both Collectors were going to be the bottom 2, I'm pretty sure most of you don't know who this third spot is going to be, and who I consider to be the final of the big 3. Now, who would I say that is? Ares? Nameless Grandmaster? Nah. How about Maestro? Labyrinth version. I was debating talking about this guy because he really is just Act 4 Maestro, but with 1 extra ability. I'll save the Maestro description for when I actually talk about him on this list, because he's a lot further down, but this one ability that they added in Labyrinth kind of makes him one of the most annoying champions I've ever faced. When you're using a tech champion, that is. So basically, this whole Labyrinth boost that he gets basically gives him a brand new ability against different classes of champions. Against Mystics, whenever they do a certain action or Maestro does a certain action, he will place a debuff on them. Against Cosmics, he will nullify on special attacks. Against Techs, he will periodically gain buffs throughout the fight. Against Mutants, he will power drain when he gets blocked, and he will gain armor ups on his special 1 and 2. Against Skill, he will reduce their ability accuracy when hitting with basic attacks by what I perceive to be 100%. And then against Science Champions, he will Purify. Now, I know what you're thinking. Come on, that's it? I mean, yeah, that really is it. Consider back in 2016, the champions we had though, it made it significantly more annoying for all of them. So back when Labyrinth came out, the champion damage output wasn't as good as it was today, and the only champion that really had a chance to compete was Star-Lord, a tech champion. And remember what I said about Maestro, the fact that he gets periodic buffs against techs? This includes regeneration, and this regeneration was so strong that the only way to counter it was to quit out of the fight. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't not talk about this. This is the most blatant example of Kabam forcing you to use as much money as possible to clear a fight, because there is literally no counter other than quitting out of the fight. And yeah, there's a very obvious solution of just use a different champion, but with the way the Mark of the Labyrinth works and the little damage output that champions had in 2016, I still think that if you got a lucky run with Star-Lord, you were getting more damage output than using literally any other class. So what's the point? I mean, feel free to disagree with the spot as much as possible, but I feel like that tech stuff alone makes him very deserving of bottom 3. But the good news is, every champion that I'm going to be talking about other than this does not have some cheap mechanic that forces you to use revives. Now that we're past the big three, every other boss on this list is serviceable, but a couple of them are just weaker than others. So I would say that the next few spots are just weak bosses that I feel nothing towards, and the worst offender of this is Bahamut. I don't know the public consensus on Bahamut as a boss as a whole, but from my past experiences, I find this guy to be one of my least favorite bosses ever, not because he's annoying, but because he's just incredibly boring. There are a multitude of reasons why I would consider this boss to be just incredibly boring and poorly designed, but first, let's give a brief rundown on how he actually works. Immediately going into the fight, you'll notice that he's practically, and the only way to prevent him from being is by granting him these volatility charges. At 3, after he throws a special attack, he will throw a radiation blast at you, and then you perform specific actions to reflect it back onto him. After you do this, this is where your big damage loop goes in, because he is no longer... I mean, this is a cool concept, don't get me wrong. The idea of reflecting a big blast that he throws at you in order to deal damage, it's a great idea, and you will see that there's another boss that came way later down the line that implements this mechanic significantly better. But as for Bahamut, here are the main issues I have with him specifically. So these volatility charges, there are 2 ways to get them, either by purifying a debuff or by just waiting out the timer, and when that expires, just be close to him, then you'll get the volatilities. And you'll need roughly 6 volatilities in order to remove his corrupted armor, considering I haven't talked about my biggest issue yet, the removal charges. The only way you can get these removal charges is by throwing a special attack through his radiation blast, but you can't throw the same special attack twice in a row because he will auto block it. Now that you have the removal charges, you can actually remove his corrupted armor based off the phase he's in. So let's talk about the phases now. I would honestly say phase 2 and 3 are where I really don't like the fight. Phase 1 is fine enough. All you have to do is knock him down with any attack, which is completely serviceable. Phase 2, I kind of don't really like it very much. In order to remove his corrupted armor here, you need to reflect his radiation blast, which, like I told you before, he needs 3 volatilities to do so. And considering that you just used 3 volatilities to get the reflect charge, you need to build all that up again. Okay, but that's fine. Sure, it pads out the runtime, but at least he doesn't have a mechanic where it feels like there's absolutely nothing I can do. Oh, by the way, in phase 3, he has a 25% chance to turn his radiation blast into a heat radiation, in which case you can do absolutely nothing and you have to just wait it out. And that's really the biggest problem with this fight. It doesn't feel like it was designed to be interesting. It feels like it was designed to just pad out runtime. So the average fight times I've noticed for if you have a purified champion is around 7 to 8 minutes, which is long, but fine for a boss fight. But if you don't have a purified champion, it pads out to 20 minutes on average. And even still, 20 minutes wouldn't be that bad if it didn't feel like a bunch of these abilities weren't necessarily engaging, more so just filler for the fight. And I know they can make this concept worthwhile and interesting, not only because of the recent Karina boss, but because of Bahamut himself, because I haven't even talked about phase 4 yet, because phase 4 is pretty good. Phase 4, otherwise known as the ping pong phase, is the only interesting part of the Bahamut fight. So essentially the reason why this works is because it removes the reversal phase, and you can parry and reflect the radiation blast as much as you want. But so can Bahamut, meaning you get in these ping pong wars until either you or Bahamut screws up. It's great, but still bogged down by the filler elements of the Bahamut fight, because he still has a chance to inflict the heat radiation blast, meaning that you can just do absolutely nothing and you kind of just have to wait out until you get a normal radiation blast. Overall, I'd have to say that the Bahamut fight is just filler, nothing more and nothing less. Of all the bosses on this list, I think that this one has to be the most pathetic, that being the Act 6.2 champion boss. This wasn't always the case. Back then when this guy released, he was considered to be a genuine threat, but due to a bunch of backlash, they ended up nerfing him to the point that the Danny Phantom box ghost is more threatening. I only learned this recently when going through all these bosses for the sake of this video, but they actually gave him a grit, meaning that you can punish the only annoying thing about him being his unstoppable. They made this guy a literal baby, and I hate it. I don't even know why Kabam deemed it necessary to counter his unstoppable, considering that's not the main problem that people had with the fight. Oh, no. That was the final phase of this guy. I'm not even gonna bother talking about the other 2 phases because they offer literally nothing, but the final phase, back then, he used to get 5 indestructibles, and the only way you could remove them was by dexing his special attacks. It has since been changed to 3. And you know what? Fair. That's completely fine, for 2 main reasons. 1, his specials have absolutely no range, making it super difficult to even even decks him in the first place. And secondly, it doesn't persist when you remove these indestructibles, so every time you go back into the fight, it always starts at 5. Yes, this makes him a lot easier, but I actually think that this change was justified, because at least there's a good payoff with the prowesses. What the fuck? I seriously see no reason to get rid of the prowess other than to make the fight as boring as possible, because there's no payoff for even doing the hard mechanics anymore. It's just so linear and boring and easy, and I hate it. So yeah, the only reason I'm putting him above Bahamut, because unlike Bahamut where I feel nothing, at least with Champion I feel something. Rage. Okay, I might have gotten a little bit carried away with that last boss, so I'm hoping that this next one isn't nearly as rage-inducing. Who the fuck are you? When I was making this video, Orochi was definitely the one I had the least knowledge on prior to it, and honestly, it's not like I really learned much after the video too, because she is pretty boring, but not in the same way as Bahamut, where it feels like there's a bunch of filler. She just doesn't really do anything that interesting. The basic rundown of this fight is you place damage over time on her, and the second she gets enough on her, she will trigger a Violent Purge. When she throws a heavy attack, just counter with a special attack, and then the Violent Purge will go on herself as opposed to you. And that's basically it. That's the whole fight. Now, how does each phase affect the fight, you might be asking? Well, it enhances her special attacks, which doesn't really affect her gameplay loop at all, because like I told you, the way to inflict the Violent Purge is by interrupting her heavy attack with your special attack, not her special attack. So instead of getting a boss where it feels like you're playing around her mechanics, it really just feels like you're brute forcing with no real direction. It honestly feels like Kabam knew this as well, because Orochi is the boss with the most phases in the game, which completely caught me off guard first time around. Bad act boss.
No, it's dead.
Okay, look, there's another one.
There's more?
I didn't.
What the hell?
Maybe.
4, right? I'm pretty sure it's 4.
Well,
Actually,
it's
no, I'm
not.
not. Overall, pretty boring design boss, but honestly, anything above this spot is considered to be mediocre or good. Ah, here we go. The ones that started it all. Kang and Thanos. Yeah, not much to talk about here considering how blatantly outdated they are. Basically, back in the day, you couldn't really do anything extravagant with them, so the whole gimmick with them is just being tanky and having special attacks that you couldn't evade since dexterity didn't exist back in the day. Which, I'll be totally honest with you, the only reason it really felt like a boss is because of the story and also the fact that they weren't playable at all, so that's why they're ranked so lowly. Wait, didn't I already talk about this guy? I don't care what anyone says. The pre-nerf champion is better than the post-nerf champion in every way conceivable. I'll keep the rundown on this guy brief considering that I already talked about him in the post-nerf section, but back then there was no grit, so you actually had to play around as unstoppable. And also, for his final phase, sure he had 5... No, that's the wrong thing. He had 5 indestructible. And didn't I already use that joke already? But there's also the prowess afterwards, basically meaning you had some type of payoff after the fact. So while the indestructible was way too difficult with 5, at least the prowess made it all worthwhile. But should I rank him a little bit lower just for the fact that the indestructible was way too difficult? Oh wait, they nerfed him where they had 3 indestructibles, but also the prowess! Like I said very early on in the video, there are 3 Karinas to talk about today, but I think the weakest one by far is the Infection variant. And that's not to say that she's a terrible boss. No, far from it. I just think that she's the least consistent and the most boring out of the 3 overall. The whole gimmick with this fight is that if you're not social distancing and keeping at least 6 feet apart from her at all times, she will place infections on you that deal damage upon expiry. But unlike the thing that I am very clearly referencing, you actually want to get the infections on you. Because whenever you're throwing either a special or a relic, for the duration of them, all of your infections become safe infections, and whenever they expire while they are safe, they instead get transferred onto Karina in order to start your damage phase. So basically, what you want to be doing for this fight is getting infections on you, timing them so that they expire while you are throwing either a special or a relic, and then you do damage to Karina whenever she throws her special too. My problems kind of arise with the infection timing, so there are ways to pause them, either through basic attacks or through the end of a special attack, they will get paused. This was done in an attempt to prevent your infections from desyncing, but even though there are good ways to pause the infections, it still doesn't prevent them from desyncing completely. And because you can only see the duration of one infection at a time, you have no idea how long you have before the other ones expire. Basically meaning whenever you throw a special attack, you only know when one is going to expire. So when you throw that special and it ends, you could see that the other infections were about to expire, but because your special special has ended. Now they are dangerous infections, and you will take guaranteed damage no matter what. This pairs rather well with Karina's self-damage mechanic. So the way she does damage to herself and the way you progress through the fight is by getting chrono tokens and allowing her to throw her special too. This will allow her to damage herself, but it also damages you slightly. You want to block it and do a little bit of chip damage to you, but all that chip damage does add up, meaning you're going to finish the fight at relatively low health, meaning you don't want to make any mistakes at all. So I think it's kind of fair to say that these infection desyncs and unavoidable scenarios kind of add to a more stressful scenario, but it's not a completely bogus mechanic like a bunch of other bosses I've talked about, and it's a relatively fast-paced fight, so I think that it is a pretty mediocre fight. So next we're going to talk about Dread Emperor Doom, a boss that I believe needs no introduction, because I think that he is one of the more well-respected bosses, and I fought him, and all I can really say to that is,
yeah, it's alright.
and I mean that in the most literal sense, because my reactions to this guy during the fight were a roller coaster to say the least. There are points in the fight where it'll feel like you're performing some elite ball knowledge by hitting him through his special attacks. There are other points where his mechanics are so unfair and annoying that the only thing you can really do in retaliation is incomprehensible rage, and then there are other points where he is just straight up trolling you by baptizing you. What? Safe to say that this is a pretty mixed bag champion, so how does he actually function? He actually reduces damage by 99% throughout the entire fight, and the only way to get through this damage reduction is by reducing his will to 0. He is actually the most invincible fight here, but I already used that joke, and why would I ever use that again? Anywho, the way you reduce this will is by hitting him through his special attacks gladiator style, but only when he has amplifies on himself, which he gains these amplifies based off of the phase that he's currently on. Which, you know, is the whole shebang with these boss characters nowadays, but I'm getting off track. Every time you hit him during his special attack, he will consume 1 amplify and lose will proportionately, and upon hitting 0 will, there will be a little cutscene, and then he will take a metric ass ton of damage. It's some pretty good stuff. It makes you feel like an elite gamer, so the things that kind of mellow it out for me is literally everything else. So the two things that this guy has to really mess up your day is amplifies and baptism of doom. I will talk about amplifies first because it allows him to get so much power, and a couple times it will just feel like there's nothing you can do. But this baptism of doom, man, this is the biggest troll I have ever seen from Kabam, because that motherfucker just has to hit you once, then he will slow walk all the way towards you, aura farming the whole time, charging his heavy attack, letting you know you fucked up, and then releasing that motherfucker, sending you to the stratosphere. It wouldn't feel as unfair if it weren't like Ares, where you can just sidestep him and it feels free, because you can't really sidestep this guy, you can't knock him down, and you can't block him, and in some cases, it just feels like an unwinnable scenario. So, at the end of the day, I don't really know how to feel about him. He's either a really high or a really low, which I think puts him out at a solid 6 out of 10, basically meaning every boss from here is either good or great. Next up on our list is yet another Karina, this one being the trap variant. The whole gimmick with this fight is, unlike the other Karina, this Karina places a trap on her after the end of her special 1. Simply knock her down into that trap in order to gain the Chrono Serpent charges, and after a while, you will be able to do damage when she throws her special 2. The whole difficulty with this fight comes down to the fact that 1, there is a trap on your side of the map that every time you walk over, you will take damage, and the fact that this Karina, as she gets lower and lower in health, makes it significantly more difficult to knock her backwards. These two mechanics work relatively well together due to the fact that as she gets lower in health, she is constantly pushing you closer to your side of the map, meaning you are going to be triggering that trap a decent amount if you're not careful, meaning you're going to take a lot more damage. So similar to the last Karina, there isn't that much wiggle room for error, meaning you want to play very well during the entire fight, but unlike the other Karina, it doesn't feel like there's completely bogus scenarios, more so just a test of skill. Now that being said, while this boss is pretty good, there is another that they released a little bit before this that utilizes the trap mechanics significantly better, and of course I am talking about Cytalis, the first trap boss, and honestly, one that holds up relatively well. When I was originally planning on doing all these bosses again, I remember having kind of negative opinions on Cytalis, but revisiting her, she's actually pretty fun. But that goes without saying that this and the Karina boss are pretty interchangeable. If you like one more than the other, it's completely fine to rank one over the other. But I personally get a little bit more value out of Cytalis as a boss as a whole. So the reason I like this fight a little bit more is it feels like you're getting a little bit more mileage over time. And granted, that's to be fair considering that Karina is a boss split into 3 while Cytalis is its own individual boss. So essentially the way that they structure this boss is as she gets lower in phases, it'll take longer for her to set up her traps, basically meaning it'll get harder for you to set yourself up to knock her into those traps. So while this boss doesn't really do anything interesting or flashy, I think she's a pretty safe and fun option for anyone that wants to actually play bosses. So I think that Kabam did a pretty decent job here. And as for this next boss, I think it's relatively the same deal. So let's talk about that boss now. The number 14 spot is going straight to Lotan, another boss that I hold in very similar regards to the Karina boss and Cytalis. And the whole gimmick with this fight is positioning. So let me demonstrate that. So the second you load into the fight, you will notice that okay, I'm just playing, but immediately going into the fight, you will notice that there is a giant raging storm going on in the background, which not only causes your phone to go nuclear, but is very important to the core gameplay of this fight in general. Essentially, what you want to be doing for this fight is, at the start of every phase, you will be tasked with going to a certain part of the map, as indicated by a callout she has at the start of each phase. Once you are at that certain point in the map, you will get a smite charge, which will allow you to remove these charges on Lotan using specific actions correlating to the phase that you are currently in. Once you get to 0 of those charges, she will become wounded and you can damage her, as written. So like, yeah, it's just another standard boss fight, which is kind of where we're at on this list right now, just kind of the standard bosses. Sure, they're good, but they're not like amazing as the ones that'll be coming in the future. When it comes to this boss fight as a whole, I really like the positioning when it comes to every single phase. I kind of wish it was a little bit more telegraphed how to remove the charges, because as it stands right now, you have to read the actual biography just to find the one little snippet of information. But at the end of the day, I would give Lotan a 6 out of 10, a relatively fun time. Say what you want about this next spot, but I think Act 4 Maestro is amazing. Now, obviously, this guy does not hold up in today's boss standards, but when it comes to his release in Act 4, absolute cinema. There isn't the most to talk about with this guy because obviously he's a little outdated in terms of abilities, but you'll immediately notice that he is the first ever superior class that we've ever gotten. What the superior class means for bosses is shit's about to get real. But this guy essentially served as the perfect foil to anyone that was actively playing when Act 4 actually released, due to the fact that we were very much just learning how to do dexterities at the time, and Maestro was the first ever character to have abilities that trigger through block, mainly being a degeneration off the end of his special 1. And if you know anything about Maestro's special 1, it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. It even catches some people off today. So basically, you had to master that special 1 timing, and once you figured it out, you felt like an elite gamer, which was amazing. Compare that to the bosses that released before him, and it's kind of night and day, as those two bosses relied on blocking special attacks that dealt a lot of damage and being relatively tanky. Whereas Maestro over here capitalizes on skilled maneuvers as well as more difficulty as the fight goes on. As he gets Furies, the lower his health gets to 0, which added to a lot of exhilaration back then, as it seemed more and more stressful to get the solo as he got stronger and stronger the lower health he got. But you'll see that this guy served as the template for a lot of other bosses, 1 through the superior class, but 2 through the concept of health-based abilities, a staple for every boss that released after him. So yeah, while this guy is incredibly outdated, obviously, I have to give him credit where it's due, as he is what I consider to be the first boss ever in Marvel Contest Champions, and that is why he is getting spot number 13. These next couple of spots were changing quite a lot during this ranking, and I have to say that I have to settle for Cerastes as the number 12 spot here. Out of all of the corrupted bosses, I would have to say that Cerastes is by far the easiest and also the most straightforward to actually learn. And that's really due to the fact that, unlike all the other bosses, this guy's phase changes affect his gameplay the least. More so, the further you get into this guy's fight, the harder he punishes you for doing his mechanics wrong. So the whole gimmick with this guy is that he has 3 shields that replace replenish over time at a rate of 1 per half second, and every time you perform an action correlating to the shield, it'll deplete by 100, and every time it hits 0, it'll break. The 3 ways to deplete a shield are either by knocking him down, throwing a striker, or hitting into his block, but repeating the same action twice in a row will instead reinforce his shield. This makes for a very quick and snappy gameplay loop, as you are constantly fluctuating between each shield to make sure that they all deplete at the exact same time, considering that later down the line, each shield will start at a randomized value. So all in all, this is a really great boss that I would rank really highly, but I'm not going to rank him any higher, solely due to the fact that he is the exact same throughout the entire fight. The only thing that the phases do is reinforce these behaviors, making it more punishing to use the same action twice. The good news is, even though Cerastes is number 12, he is still an amazing boss, which really just goes to show how great of bosses Kabam has made recently. And now, let's get on to number 11, shall we? If there is one boss that has never failed to disappoint in this game, it has gotta be Grandmaster, as every iteration of this guy has been phenomenal. Point being that this is the first Grandmaster I'll be talking about, Nameless Grandmaster, and he is still a phenomenal boss. This guy was kind of made as an opposite to Abyss Collector, because while that guy was made to try to fix the wrongs of the 5.2 Collector while also failing miserably, this guy acts as Grandmaster if Grandmaster was smart. Because this guy basically takes what the old Grandmaster does, but essentially amplified it to a level that feels a lot more difficult, but not in a way that feels unfair. So unlike the first iteration of Grandmaster, this Grandmaster really likes kids games, iterating classics like Red Light, Green Light, and Simon Says. But other mechanics that the old Grandmaster had, like a periodic reverse controls, got amplified to a permanent reverse controls, and the final phase is very, very different. I'll save the normal Grandmaster phase for when I talk about him, but essentially this Grandmaster will go fully unkillable, and he will have 4 different unkillable effects. The way to remove each of these is to knock him down with a heavy attack, special 1, special 2, and special 3. But that's not what makes it difficult. What makes it difficult is the cycling reverse controls he gets during this phase. So essentially, every time you land an attack, you will cycle between reverse controls on and off, which, while it may make for some very big gamer moments, I have to admit is one of the most difficult things we have ever seen gameplay-wise in this game. The good news is, the developers thought the exact same way, because you can cheese it with reverse control immune. While I would love to rank this guy a lot higher, as he is one of my favorite bosses ever, I have to look at the bigger picture here and realize that he's not everyone else's favorite. I think a lot of people really don't like this guy. I mean, I included him in my poll that I talked about earlier that Abyss Collector absolutely landslided. This guy got a decent amount of votes, but also the astute observers here might have realized that Ares actually placed higher, and I haven't talked about him yet, so I guess everything that I talked about just got thrown out the window. Short summary here, Nameless Grandmaster is heavily underrated. I absolutely love the guy. Now moving on to the top 10. Remember when I was talking about Bahamut? Remember how I said that I really liked his gameplay loop, but I thought it absolutely got bogged down by a shit ton of filler? Well, the good news is, we finally got a Bahamut that is good. I can't explain why, but the third and final Karina boss just completely outshines the other two in a way I've never thought imaginable. Because while the first one that I talked about was dull and boring, and the other one was kind of interesting but kind of inconsistent, this one is fluent, fast, and snappy throughout the entire fight. So basically, this Karina boss uses the Bahamut Radiation Blast mechanic, but removes all the baggage such as the reflect charges and the heat radiation blasts. Basically meaning every time she throws that projectile at you, all you have to do is parry and heavy attack, and then it will reflect back onto her every single time. This feels amazing and significantly better than whatever the hell they are trying to cope with Bahamut. So the way that Karina throws these blasts is quite similar to Bahamut. Like Bahamut, where he has a timer that builds up volatilities, Karina has a timer that counts up to 100. Once it hits 100, she will idle for half a second before throwing a blast at you. The reason I think this works better than Bahamut, other than the obvious filler elements, is due to the fact that, unlike Bahamut, who has to throw the special attack, Karina will throw it instantly, basically meaning the second you know that that timer's about to hit 100, you have to dash back and either throw a heavy or a block in order to reflect the charge. This adds a level of fluidity, Jesus Christ. Okay, it adds a level of fluidity that I never thought possible with Bahamut. And I never really talked about this before, but you'll notice with these higher rankings that they're a lot more fast-paced fights, as I really like to play the game in a fast pace. And to add to everything I've already talked about, this Karina has the ping pong phase of Bahamut. You know, the only good thing about the Bahamut fight. So, on top of everything that I love about this boss, she has the only good thing about Bahamut. So, A-tier boss, absolutely love her. But she's number 10 for a reason, because every other boss I think is phenomenal. Starting with... Out of all of the corrupted bosses of Act 8 and 9, I would have to say my personal favorite is the final boss of Act 8, that being Glycan. While he may not have the fluidity of Cerastes, I personally feel like he is significantly more fun throughout the entire fight. And that is due to the fact that, unlike a lot of the modern bosses, this guy never gets wounded. He is an active threat throughout the entire fight. It's great. He is essentially a Cerastes on steroids, and while a couple of his actions, such as the double intercept, are a lot jankier than Cerastes, I think he has a lot more actions to accommodate for that. But the main reason why I think that this guy is the absolute best is because of the shakeups that he has between phase changes. So his phase 1 is very simple, it's exactly what I described, but the second you knock him down and kill him, he will enter a cutscene and enter phase 2. This is where you realize that this guy means business, as his gameplay changes completely. So this phase, you will immediately notice that he can no longer throw his special 1, only his special 2. But this special alternates between the special 1 and 2, basically meaning you need to know how to punish both of them, as the only way to do damage to this guy is to punish either his specials or heavy attacks. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that in phase 1. But that's not all, as in phase 3, it changes again. He will go back to throwing special 1s and special 2s accordingly, but now, every time you dash back during them, you will be rooted, basically meaning you are forced to know the exact timings or you will get hit. All around, this boss is phenomenal. I love everything about him, but I will not rank him higher, as I personally believe that there is another boss that completely expands everything he does better, somehow, given how good this boss is. If you know anything about boss mechanics, I'm pretty sure you know who I'm talking about already, but he's not going to be next on the list. No, he's further down. So now let's talk about spot number 8. Out of all of these bosses, I think my opinions on Gwenmaster have changed the most. While I remember back in the day thinking that she was pretty good but kind of forgettable, as I replayed her, I was cheering the whole time. I love this fight. I think that the reason this boss works so well is because she has 6 phases, one for each class respectively, basically meaning that each one functions in very different ways respective to their class archetypes. But it doesn't feel like any one phase lingers more than the other. They all feel equally balanced due to the fact that there is a set timer through the countdown of destruction. Basically, when this timer ends, she will do massive damage to you and cycle to the next phase. The way to deal damage to her is by completing the certain task based off of the class that you're in before the countdown expires, in which case the special 2 will instead do damage to her instead of you. So now, I will talk about all of the phases in order from my least favorite to most favorite. The first I will talk about is the Cosmic Phase, Vision Arcus's Retro Cape. This is the only phase I would consider to be bad, as you're not doing anything here other than staying as far away from Gwenmaster as possible to build armor breaks on you, because unlike Arcus where you have to be close to get him, you have to be far away from her in order to get these armor breaks. In order to remove the plot armor, all you have to do is knock her down when she has 10 armor breaks on you. It's very simple and kind of just lackluster. The next phase I want to talk about is the Killmonger phase. This acts as your standard beat 'em up phase, as she gets 60 counterpunch charges and all you have to do is get them to 0. You remove 1 every time you hit her with a basic attack, and 3 every time you knock her down. Whenever she throws a special attack, she will get a reverberation, basically reflecting all of the special damage that you would have done to her, incentivizing you not to throw special attacks while it's up. But from my experience, you don't really need to throw the special attacks, as just throwing basic attacks will deplete her to 60 before the countdown expires. The next phase is the Iron Man phase, which is also kind of straightforward. She will get 6 armor ups and will get a new one every 14 seconds. The way to remove armor ups is by throwing a 4th light attack, breaking her block, or interrupting her heavy attack after her special attack with your own heavy attack. I know that was a little bit complex, but trust me, it's not that bad. The way this phase ends is once she has 0 armor ups, and it acts as the last phase in the cycle, because once this one ends, if she is still alive, she will cycle back to phase 1. The next phase to talk about is the Invisible Woman phase. She will get a force field, and once it is depleted to 0, she will move on to the next phase. You can increase your damage by intercepting her, but also at the end of her special attack, she will get invisible, basically making it harder for you to land those intercepts. Again, another standard one, but I find this one to be a lot more fluid. That might be because I love intercepting though. The next phase to talk about is the one that she starts every single fight with, being the mutant phase. So she will enter in diamond form, and basically you want to alternate her power levels because every time she changes from diamond to normal form, she will get 1 prowess. She will reverse control you on her special attacks, but if you dex while she has 4 prowesses, the phase will end. This phase acts as a great opener, as it is the hardest and most complex in my opinion, since you have to always make sure that she enters 1 power level above you in order to transform from diamond to normal form, but also you need to know how to reverse controls, basically making for a very good opener because everything after is a lot more straightforward. But it is not my favorite phase, as the favorite one is the Mystic one. So remember back in Nameless Grandmaster when I talked about the final phase where the only way to kill him was by doing every action that knocked the opponent down? Well, I think he got inspiration from Gwynmaster because it serves literally the exact same purpose. In order to clear this phase, you need to do every knockdown action in the game, and I really like that Nameless Grandmaster phase, so naturally I like this one a lot more. So while this boss did have some weak points, she had some very high highs, and it's not even like those weak points were bad, just a little bit boring. So I think that puts her in a very deserved spot number 8. Now moving on to spot number 7. It's clear to me that Act 7 was a phenomenal chapter, not only because every single boss cracked the top 10, but also it served as the anime redemption arc for the first ever boss in Marvel Contest of Champions, Kang the Conqueror. Because this guy went from a straight punching bag to one of the most formidable bosses, not once, but twice. But the first boss I'm going to be talking about is the 7.3 Kang. This boss acts as a remaster of the original Act 2 Kang, not only in the form of animations and actual boss fights, but by serving as a core to the character of Kang by giving him a playstyle very true to the character, that involving time. Throughout the fight, Kang will task you with having certain amounts of power before a timer expires, and you can juggle this based off of Kang throwing his special attacks. Every time you dex one of his special hits, you will gain power, and every time you block special hits, you will lose power. Either throw a special attack corresponding to the number in the top left, or wait for the timer to expire while having the appropriate amounts of power, and you will do damage to him. If you fail to do this, you yourself will take damage. But the best part about this guy, in my opinion, is his phases, which perfectly correlate to the core gameplay of this guy. So, in phase 2, your power gaining abilities are enhanced, basically meaning it is harder for you to lower your power. And in phase 3, it is the opposite. Your power draining abilities are more effective, basically meaning it is harder for you to gain power. And his final phase, phase 4, while being the weakest of them, is still a very strong phase. So essentially, all you have to do is race to a special 3. When near him, you will gain more power, and basically all you have to do is get to the special 3 before him. If he gets it, you will die. If you get it, he will die. As you can see, this guy emphasizes time and power, and every single one of his phases perfectly correlates to make a very fluid boss. But he is number 7 for a reason, because every other boss is that much better. Somehow, we are still going above and beyond in terms of bosses. So now, let's get on to spot number 6. If I had to talk about bosses, this is what I would have to say for a couple of them. The first ever boss we got was Act 2 Kang. The first ever boss that felt like a boss was Act 4 Maestro. The first ever boss to include abilities based off of lost health was Act 5 Collector. But the first ever modern boss, I would have to say, was the Infinity War Thanos boss in 2018. I think that this is the best event Kabam has ever done, as the Infinity War event brought a ton of eyes on this game, and mainly that is due to the bosses that they introduced. So before, they didn't really feel like bosses, but after Infinity War Thanos, a boss felt like a monumental event. I mean, this guy had everything. Cutscenes, phases, everything you could ever imagine for a boss, but he actually was split into 2 variations through this event, and I am going to talk about both today. The first and weakest of the two has to be the Infinity War Thanos Boss 1, which is currently completely unplayable. And this is really sad to me, because while the other two variations of Thanos can be found in other forms of content, I think this one is the funniest, mainly just for this clip alone.
Okay, right. Okay.
While this guy's incredibly outdated, I think it would be great to have him in any form of content, but I'm getting off track. Let's talk about the actual boss now. So this is the first ever boss to implement phases, and I don't mean like as health gets lost, you'll get more and more abilities like Collector. No. Every time you change this guy's phases, he will activate a brand new stone, activating completely different mechanics for the phase. This mechanic was so good that every other boss that released after this guy has seen that mechanic in some way, shape, or form. So I gotta give him credit there. It's very good. So now let's talk about his phases in order. So the first phase that you have to deal with is his Genesis Stone. This will activate every time he throws a special one. So whenever you're near him, you will take a chunk of damage, but if you manage to parry him, it'll disable the stone temporarily. I think that even in 2018, this stone was pretty easy, but I think it's a nice warm-up to the stones to come. The second stone is the funny one that I showed you earlier, and it basically reverses your controls temporarily. And I know what a bunch of you are saying, this is super easy, I could do that in my sleep. Keep in mind, this Thanos is the first ever character to implement reverse controls, not Emma Frost like previously thought. These mechanics activated upon entering Phase 2 or whenever he threw a special 2, and then afterwards you dealt with Phase 3. This phase is the easiest to grasp out of the three, but I think it is definitely the hardest of them, because Thanos will go unstoppable for a brief time, and this unstoppable will trigger every time he activates a special 3. But there's a little thing I was hiding from you. Thanos can only throw the specials correlating to the phase, so in Phase 1, he can only throw special 1, in Phase 2, he can only throw special 2s, and of course, in Phase 3, he can only throw special 3s. Normally, the special 3 would insta-kill you, but there are two ways in order to prevent this. One, by intercepting him, you will get a safeguard, preventing you from just insta-dying to his special 3. But also, if you're an Avenger, you basically get a built-in safeguard, which, I mean, it's completely fine for me due to the fact that this is an Avengers event. You'd want the Avengers to be good against Thanos. All of these combined gives you a true boss experience, which was very much missing in the early days of Marvel Contest of Champions, and this boss was so good that his template is used for every single boss that came after him. But I'm not going to rank him any higher due to the fact that I think he's more or less a starter boss. So like I said, this guy got split into two, and I fully agree that the latter half is better. And even then, a year later, we got a second Thanos event, and that Thanos is not split into two, and you can tell that that guy is a true boss battle. So while this guy is amazing still, I think he's more or less a template for better bosses to come. So now let's move on to the top 5, shall we? So it goes without saying that in order to get the top 5, you have to be a really good boss. And all 5 of these bosses are 9 out of 10 super S tier bosses. And to kick things off, we actually have the final boss of Act 7 being Superior Kang. I'm pretty sure that this is most people's favorite boss, and I can absolutely see that because this guy is one of the most fluid boss fights I have ever seen. So how exactly does this guy work? So immediately when going into the fight, you will notice that you can't hit him. Every time you try to, he will instead counterattack you. This counterattack is actually crucial in order to get him into his damage loop. These counterattacks are, once again, based off of certain actions that you do. So there are 4 ways to trigger a counterattack: either hitting him while he's stunned, intercepting him, punishing his heavy attack, or punishing his special attacks. Every time you do one of these, you will get a slipstream charge, and upon hitting 10, he will enter a time collapse in which he is wounded. But be warned, do not repeat the same action twice in a row, as doing so will instead result in him parrying you and punishing you for it. Realistically talking, this boss fight is kinda weird. It's really weird how this superior entity cannot realize that every time he counterattacks you, he's actually punishing himself, but I don't know, I guess every time he goes back in time, he erases memory. I don't know. Oh, you also might be wondering what I meant by go back in time. So essentially every time you kill this guy, instead of actually knocking him out, he will instead enter a cutscene in which he goes back in time, rewinds the fight to full. This is the first time we've seen a boss cutscene since Thanos Infinity War and Endgame, and you'll see it a little bit more afterwards in Glycan, Orochi, Lotan, whatever. This is basically his way of transitioning phases, so now I'll talk about the phases, as I think they are equally as good as making this guy a super fleshed out fight. So, upon entering Phase 2, his counterattacks will instead attack you at different speeds, so he can either attack you at fast speed, normal speed, or slow motion. In phase 3, his counterattack gets buffed to where you can't repeat the last 2 actions in a set. So if you were to do a parry and then a heavy attack, you can't do a parry since that's the action you did first until you either intercept or bait out his special attacks. This acts to add a little bit more micromanaging to the fight and also prevent it from feeling a little bit stale and doing the same thing over and over again. And then finally, we have phase 4, which again, like so many others, I think is the weakest addition, but still not that bad. So essentially, his special attacks will get the speed bonus that the counterattacks did, basically being the fast motion, regular motion, and slow motion. All in all, the reason why this guy is so high is due to the fact that he feels versatile. It doesn't feel like you're going through the motions like Cerastes. Every time you enter a new phase, it shakes things up just a little bit to feel like you're doing something completely different. And that is something I feel like a decent amount of these bosses are missing. I feel like a lot of these bosses have one mechanic that they do over and over again until they're dead. Kang also does that, but at least the new phases feel different enough to where it actually feels like you're evolving throughout the fight. So that is why Superior Kang is number 5. So now let's talk about spot number 4. You probably could have seen this coming from a mile away, but spot number 4 is going to Infinity War Thanos boss number 2, otherwise known as the Grandmaster's Gauntlet Thanos boss. It's clear to me of the 2 bosses of the Infinity War event, Kabam definitely sees the latter as the more boss-like character. One, considering that all of the Thanos bosses that came after this guy, including Deathless Thanos, all use this guy's animations, and 2, he just has more boss-like abilities, whereas the first one felt more like an appetizer for what was to come. The template for this guy, his stones, and his phases follow the exact same as every Thanos boss that came before and after him, but his phases I feel like are pretty solid, so let's talk about them now. Upon entering phase 1, he will enter a primordial cocoon, which basically every time you make contact with him, he will bleed you. There is a secondary effect with the stone, so every 10 seconds he will enter an auto block phase for 1 second, hit him during this auto block, and he will regenerate 10% of his max health instantly. Right away, you'll notice that this guy was a lot more restrictive than the previous Thanos boss. While that guy didn't really have anything that was restrictive, this guy has stuff like bleed upon hitting him. So you either wanted to bring a bleed immune or wait out that timer, but at that point, he might have already had a special 1, meaning you got absolutely no damage while you were waiting. Immediately after this, you will enter phase 2, the goaded phase. So immediately entering this phase, he will degenerate you for 80% of your current health. When this degen expires, you will immediately regen it all back. The secondary effect is that in his special 2, some of his hits are fake, basically meaning that they do nothing. I think it was just really funny back in the day because absolutely no one knew what the fake projectiles and real projectiles looked like, basically meaning that they tried to dex all of them to less than desirable results. But if you had to ask me, my favorite phase out of all of these Thanos bosses is his phase 3, the Death Stone. It is very simple. He will enter Death Touch for a brief time, and all you have to do is not get hit. If he so much as light taps your block, you are instantly dead. It is so simple, but so effective to serve as the final phase for Thanos, considering that his phase 3 is the exact same as the Infinity War Thanos boss 1, where you have to intercept or be an Avenger in order to get Safeguard to prevent yourself from instantly dying to his special 3. I love this because it takes one of the harder mechanics back in the day, intercepting, and amplifies it up to max. You couldn't even block to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. You had to play your intercepts perfectly. And considering that medium intercepts were known but not that known, and light intercepting's not even being a thought, it was the perfect conclusion to an absolutely phenomenal event. But that being said, this guy is only number 4 because the next 3 bosses are so generational. I think that they are perfect bosses. So let's start with the bronze. The first spot here is going to Ares, a boss that I think needs no introduction. I think that this is one of the fairest and most well-balanced bosses they have ever made. I know a couple of you may disagree because that last phase has brought generational trauma, but as Kabam has once said,
get good. Get good.
And you can't even get mad at me, Kabam said that. And no, I'm not biased. That's not me on stage. If it were me, you would have seen a 2D PNG of a ham, you know? So, not me. That's a different ham. But why is Ares the GOAT? Because I haven't even talked about him yet. This boss gives everyone in the roster an even footing. Unless your name's Hercules, but we don't talk about him. This boss acts as the ultimate beat 'em up. No special abilities, no damage boosters, nothing. Just you and Ares. And I absolutely love this. But the reason this fight I love so much, while the final phase is super fast-paced and difficult, I think that the fight naturally progresses to it in a very fair way. So Ares does something with his phases that I haven't really seen with the boss beforehand. So while he does introduce new mechanics through each of these phases that shake up gameplay, I think that they instead build the player up to naturally progress them towards the final phase, which is very, very difficult. So the way that Ares works is he will give you bonus for damage every single time you correctly bait his special attacks, but his special attacks are unique in the sense that you can't just fully dex the whole thing. Instead, you have to memorize a pattern per special. For special 1, it is dex, parry, parry, light, dex, and then for special 2, it is parry, parry, light, dex, dex, and then swipe up or down. This up or down motion is a little bit finicky, but we'll talk about that later. So phase 1 acts as kind of a warm-up for the player. The specials are incredibly slowed down, and you actually have control over which special he will throw, which, for players that live and die by the speed and complexity of phase 5, this is an absolute nightmare to get through, but I think that it is great for a new player that may not be familiar with the nightmare that is to come, so I think that it is handled perfectly as a warm-up phase. Phase 2 slightly increases the speed of the specials and acts to merge them together. So, similar to Glycan, he can only throw a special 2, but it'll be a mix of both the special 1 and special 2. I know a lot of people have a little bit of difficulty determining which special he is actually going to throw. There are a couple tips and tricks to know. For 1, his eyes will blink accordingly to the special, once for the special 1 as shown, and 2 for the special 2. But if you really want to get technical, you can actually pause right before his weapon is drawn. If it's the axe, it's his special 1, and if it's the sword, it's his special 2. You'll notice that this guy has a lot of technical tips and tricks to make him feel really fair and balanced. So now let's move on to phase 3. Phase 3 adds another level of complexity after his special attacks. So after a special is thrown, you will have 2 consecutive actions that you have to do. Fail to do these 2 actions and he will punish you. I really like the complexity in phase 3 here. Not only trying to figure out what special he's actually going to throw, but also knowing exactly what you have to do in order to punish that special afterwards. I think it is great. So now we're moving on to phase 4. And once again, like the phase 4 curse for every boss I've talked about before, it's the weakest edition. Phase 4, like all the other previous phases, increases the speeds of the special attacks, but also adds a timer. When that timer expires, he will get a brace charge, basically meaning he will go unstoppable on dashes. There is a way to reset this timer. Every time you attack him during his heavy attack, the timer will reset. I know that can be very difficult for a lot of players, so here is another tip and trick. This Ares boss is probably one of the easiest characters to sidestep in the entire game. Basically, how you sidestep a boss is when you dex a medium attack, immediately follow with a light attack, and for most characters on the roster, it'll be a guaranteed punish for this guy. And this tip will be needed as now we are entering phase 5, what many people consider to be the hardest thing Kabam has ever done. This is what every phase was building up to, as in this one, you will get 99 immortalities. You will remove 1 every time you do a correct action for his special attacks or whenever you intercept him. But that's not what makes this phase so difficult. The difficulty rises with the fact that you are at 1 HP. One singular mistake and you're out, completely done. I completely understand that this is one of the more controversial final phases. You either really like it or you really hate it. I personally stand in the middle of these 2 perspectives. While I understand that this is a very difficult and challenging phase, I also think that it is a phase that was naturally built up to through the progression of the fight, unlike a bunch of other champions where it just felt like completely unfair bogus. I personally think that the natural build up to this final phase is what really saves this fight. If this final phase felt completely different than everything else in the previous phases, this guy would be significantly lower. But because of that, he is at spot number 3. So now, let's get on with the silver, spot number 2. The second best boss in Marvel Contest of Champions, I personally feel, is the Grand Master. A lot of people would say that this is the number 1 boss, and honestly, I can't blame him. This is a perfect boss that, in my opinion, saved the bosses in Marvel Contest of Champions. It kind of feels like this guy was made in retaliation to a lot of the older bosses that had mechanics that felt kind of unfair. This guy is all about playing as fair as possible. The whole gimmick with the Grandmaster is he wants you to play his game, which revolves all around tokens. Every time you do something that he wants you to, you get a token of competence. Every time you fail, you get a token of blunder. Receive 5 tokens of blunder and he will instantly go to a special 3, instantly killing you. Right off the bat, this shows that this guy is not all about unfair mechanics. Literally anything you do to get tokens of blunder was 100% a skill issue, and I absolutely love this for bosses. But the tokens play a helping hand into what I consider to be the best part of Grandmaster, that being Wounded. So Wounded is a mechanic that I found to be so revolutionary that a bunch of other bosses, if not every boss, has incorporated it in some way, shape, or form after his release. And it makes absolute sense why this was so important. If you think about it, Wounded acts as a sort of reward phase for learning all of Grandmaster's mechanics, and I think that is very important with bosses, having some type of payoff for actually mastering difficult mechanics for bosses. So for that alone, I have to say that Grandmaster is probably one of the most important bosses in Marvel Contest of Champions history, but how does he actually fare phase-wise? Because this guy has 4 phases. Each phase acts in a completely different way, but all serve one function. Basically, Grandmaster is telling you what he wants from you, and if you succeed and do what he wants, you get tokens of competence. If you fail, tokens of blunder. In phase 1, he acts like my younger brother when we used to wrestle back in the day, getting pissy and banning certain actions that he was getting owned with. These actions include light attacks, parry, and dexterity. After all 3 of these have been banned, he will unban all of them and then throw a special one. So I'll talk about the special one here because it is seen throughout the entire fight. Every time he throws a special one, he will randomize the building blocks into 3 different projectiles, either dexing, blocking, or taking the hit. Fail to do what he wants here, and you get the point, token of blunder. So, phase 2 acts as a sort of do what I say mechanic. He will call out one of 5 actions, and after calling out all 5 actions, he will become wounded. The good news about this phase is that although some of these actions are character specific, such as inflicted damage over time effect, he can't call out the same action twice. He will only reset all of them after his wounded phase ends and if he's still in the phase. Phase 3 serves the same example. He can call out actions. This time they will repeat, but all of these actions can be performed by every single character in the game. And secondly, to prevent this phase from being too straightforward and simple, there is now a timer that upon expiry will briefly reverse your controls. And finally, to close things out, we have phase 4, which, thank goodness, finally breaks the curse as this phase 4 is actually good. So he will become unstoppable for a long duration of time. You can disable this unstoppable briefly by intercepting him, but upon this unstoppable expiring, you will be shot up to 3 bars of power and he will be permanently wounded. Throw the special 3 to finally kill him. It cannot be understated how much this guy shifted boss making in general. So not only through the wounded mechanic, every single boss afterwards had some type of payoff for all of their difficult mechanics, but also because this guy emphasized fairness and balance through his mechanics so much, we have seen it in every single boss throughout. No boss, I think, after Grandmaster has had some type of just unfair mechanic, and I absolutely love him for it. The Grandmaster absolutely deserves his spot on the top of the Marvel Contest Champions bosses. He is one of the most generational bosses Kabam has ever made, and you could argue that he deserves spot number 1, but personally, I think that there is one more boss that surpasses him. One more boss that was so important to this game and one of my favorite bosses ever. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you spot number 1. This video has been an absolute journey. I have loved every aspect of making this specific video, going through every single boss and getting to see Kabam's thought process when making every one of these bosses, no matter how bad or good they were. It was great, and it really made me enjoy the bosses in this game so much more than I already did. But there is one boss that upon revisiting, I just couldn't put him anywhere other than spot number 1. He is my favorite boss ever and probably the most important boss for me personally when I played this game. I am talking about the nameless Thanos boss for the 2019 Endgame event, more commonly known today as the Eternity of Pain Thanos. This could have been seen based off of how highly I rank the Infinity War Thanos bosses, but this guy takes both of those fights and amplifies it to a level that I absolutely love. This guy blends engagement, difficulty, and above all, enjoyability masterfully. This guy is perfect. A criticism that I would have for the first two Infinity War Thanos bosses is that the stones were on a timer. Their abilities would expire after a set duration, so theoretically, you could just dash back and wait for those timers to expire before actually hitting him. Nameless Thanos recognizes this, and instead of also having timer-based abilities, his stones are permanent and you have to manually disable them doing specific actions. This adds a level of engagement and fun that I thought was missing a little bit with the Infinity War Thanos bosses. And the good news is, not only does this make him more engaging, but his phases are also really good, so now let's talk about them. In Phase 1, he will enter a cocoon, which will reflect all damage and stuns back onto you. You remove this stone by knocking him down with a heavy or special attack. This immediately set the table for this guy, because he was a lot more challenging than the previous two Thanos bosses. It was very difficult to knock him down. I mean, sure, with power creep and stuff, it's a lot easier to actually do that now, but back then, it was a relative challenge. Phase 2 ups the ante by merging the previous two phases of reverse controls and optical illusion, by having a permanent reverse controls as well as the illusion blast. The way to remove this reverse controls, because it is now permanent, is by doing the fourth hit in a light attack. This was the perfect blend of the previous two Thanos bosses, but also made it a lot more challenging for newer players. It was very difficult to get those final light hits with the reverse controls being permanent. But now we wrap things up with Phase 3, which I feel perfectly captures the essence of this Thanos boss. So every time he throws a special 3, he will go unstoppable for 5 seconds. Keep this in mind. The important part of this fight is that he is permanently indestructible. You cannot damage him, and the only way to remove this indestructible is by intercepting him. This will remove it temporarily and give you a window of opportunity to actually damage him, and also give you the safeguard to prevent yourself from dying to his special 3. Tying back with the unstoppable, due to the fact that Thanos continually gains power, you have a very, very small window to actually intercept him to get the safeguard and remove the indestructible. This makes for a very stressful final phase, and I think it fits perfectly with the whole goal of this Thanos boss, to be a very difficult threat, and I think that they handled it perfectly. The feeling that you get after beating this guy back then was unmatched, as he felt like a tried and true actual boss fight. There was nothing like him back then, and I feel like the reward for finally beating him was unmatched. So that is why I personally feel like this guy is the best boss that Kabam has ever made. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. Oh my god, this was made to more so be a break video, but it turned out to be my longest video ever. Thank you to everyone that stuck through it till the end. I cannot appreciate you guys enough. And of course, as always, if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a ton, but only do so if you enjoyed the video. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this one. I will see you in the next one.